The car would slow. But then it would pick up speed. A quarter mile later, it would slow again. Kenneth appeared to be making frequent glances to the right as though hunting for a house number. It was an odd area to be looking for when there were no houses. This stretch of the post road was almost entirely commercial. What was Kenneth up to exactly? Not that driving around Milford an hour before midnight had to mean someone was up to something. After all, Paul was out on the road too, and if he'd gone straight home after attending a student theatrical production at West Haven, he'd be there by now. But here he was, driving aimlessly, thinking about Charlotte. He'd invited her to come along. Although Paul was not involved in the production, several of his students were, and he felt obliged to be supportive. Charlotte, the real estate agent, begged off. She had a house to show that evening. And frankly, waiting while a prospective buyer checked the number of bedrooms held a promise of more excitement than waiting for Godot. Even if his wife hadn't had to work, Paul would have been surprised if she'd joined him. Lately, they'd been more like roommates who shared a space rather than partners who shared a life. Charlotte was distant, preoccupied. "It's just work," she'd say when he tried to figure out what might be troubling her. Could it be Josh, he wondered? Did she resent it when his son came for the weekend? No, that couldn't be it. She liked Josh, had gone out of her way to make him feel welcome, and hello. Kenneth had his blinker on. He steered the Volvo wagon into an industrial park that ran at right angles to the main road. A long row of businesses, every one of them no doubt closed for the last 5 hours or more. If Kenneth was impaired or sleepy, he might still have enough sense to get off the road and sleep it off. Maybe he was going to use his phone, call a taxi. Either way, Paul was thinking it was less urgent for him to intervene. Still, Paul slowed and pulled over to the side of the road just beyond where Kenneth had turned in. The Volvo drove around to the back of the building, brake lights flashing. It stopped a few feet from a dumpster. Why go around the back, Paul wondered. What was Kenneth up to? He killed his headlights, turned off the engine, and watched. In Paul's overactive imagination, the words drug deal came up in lights. But there was nothing in Kenneth's character to suggest such a thing. And in fact, Kenneth didn't appear to be meeting anyone. There was no other car, no suspicious person materializing out of the darkness. Kenneth got out, the dome light coming on inside. He slammed the door shut, circled around the back until he was at the front passenger door and opened it. Kenneth bent over to pick up something. Paul could not make out what it was. Dark, although everything looked pretty dark, and about the size of a computer printer, but irregularly shaped. Heavy, judging by the way Kenneth leaned back slightly for balance as he carried it the few steps over to the dumpster. He raised the item over the lip and dropped it in. "What the hell?" Paul said under his breath. Kenneth closed the passenger side door, went back around to the driver's side, and got in behind the wheel. Paul slunk down in his seat as the Volvo turned around and came back out onto the road. Kenneth drove right past him and continued in the same direction. Paul watched the Volvo's taillights recede into the distance. He turned and looked to the dumpster, torn between checking to see what Kenneth had tossed into it and continuing to follow his friend. When he'd first spotted Kenneth, Paul had been worried about him. Now, add curious. Whatever was in that dumpster would, in all likelihood, still be there in a few hours. Paul keyed the ignition, turned on his lights, and threw the car back into drive. The Volvo was heading north out of Milford, beyond the houses and grocery stores and countless other industrial parks and down winding country roads canopied by towering trees. At one point, they passed a police car parked on the shoulder, but they were both cruising along under the limit. Paul began to wonder whether Kenneth had any real destination in mind. The Volvo's brake lights would flash as he neared a turnoff, but then the car would speed up until the next one. Kenneth, again, appeared to be looking for something. Suddenly it appeared Kenneth had found it. The car pulled well off the pavement. The lights died. Paul, about 1/10 of a mile back, could see no reason why Kenneth had stopped there. There was no driveway, no nearby home that Paul could make out. Paul briefly considered driving right on by, but then thought, Fuck this cloak and dagger shit. I need to see